Hey everyone, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Chris Garrity. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a co-coordinator with the FUNA Coalition. Um, and I'm just really excited and honored to be with you all today. I'm learning a lot. And so I'm just really grateful for the leadership of especially Dr. Maha Hilal for creating this space, for like thinking about it and making it happen. So just want to love up on Maha a little bit, a lot. So without further ado, we're transitioning to our next session, which is on environmental justice. And our speaker is Andrea Vidaure, and I'm going to share some information about Andrea. Oh, before I do, actually, apologies. So I'm a co-coordinator of the FUNA Coalition. I'm based in DC in Ward 6. On the unceded ancestral lands of the Piscataway people, the Pamunkey people, the Nacotchtank people, and the Tuxedo people. So Andrea, who uses she, her pronouns, grew up in the unceded territories of the Tongva, also known as the Inland Empire of Southern California, and graduated with a BA in Global Studies from the University of California at Riverside. She has lived at the intersections of multiple issues, which led her to engage in work that advances her community's quality of life. Over the past couple of years, she has worked on environmental justice issues throughout the Inland Empire. She is a co-founder, member, and policy analyst of the People's Collective for Environmental Justice, a community-based organization focused on fighting environmental racism and finding solutions through community work. So again, Andrea is going to be talking about and sharing her expertise and knowledge about environmental justice. So without further ado.
Cool, thank you so much, Chris. Can everybody hear me? Cool. So first and foremost, thank you so much for having me here today. I've been learning a lot from the different speakers, and I'm really excited to just be sharing space with you guys from the East Coast that have similar mindsets and want similar things. So yeah, thank you for having me in the space. Like was said, my name is Andrea. I'm with an organization called People's Collective for Environmental Justice. It's an organization that me and my neighbors built up over a year ago because we felt like we needed some type of horizontal, non-hierarchical space to build power with one another so that we could fight the endless examples of environmental racism that we're seeing here in our communities of the Inland Empire in Southern California. So today I'm gonna come to you guys with that lived experience and a couple of years that I've spent specifically peeling back the layers on Amazon and environmental racism. But I'm also hoping that I get to touch on other ways that Amazon inflicts violence in the form of environmental harm that I've gotten to learn through the privilege of getting to work with other frontline communities throughout the country that I've been able to meet through the Athena space. So this is hopefully going to get to touch on both of those things. So before I start, let's get to the bottom of this topic, which is environmental racism. We love talking about environmental justice. It's in my org's name. And we love to talk about it because that's the aim, that's the goal, that's what we're fighting for. We want justice in our communities. But really what we're doing on the day-to-day is fighting environmental racism. And so I want to dig into what environmental racism is. And we know environmental racism is the intoxication of the water, soil, and air. It's the siting of places that intoxicate the soil, water, and air. And it also is the limitation of access to water and soil and healthy foods and open spaces, particularly to people of color. And low-income people. And it's been so well documented that corporations and governments target communities of color so that they can put toxic and hazardous sites, but the government admits it as in their definition of environmental justice. It's hard to get the United States to admit to a lot of things when it comes to racism, but it's so well documented, and there have been so many explicit ways that we've seen corporations come in and say that they'd rather put a polluting site in a community of color rather than a white neighborhood, that it has led to what we know now as environmental justice and the recognition that this is a thing. So this is decades of work by people throughout the United States that have gotten environmental justice to get the recognition that it deserves, right? For so long, it was just this thing that we thought was a thing, but now it's been so well documented that we can say that it is true. That is historically and to this day how we think about toxic sites and where we put them. And we love to, we think about environmental racism in very clear ways, like we're polluting somebody's water stream or we're putting a garbage dump in somebody's community. But I want to talk about non-traditional ways of environmental racism too, because I think it's really important for our conversations about all the things we're happening. One that I have to start with, and one of the first examples of environmental racism is this country's creation, right? By the murdering and displacing of Indigenous people, forcing them onto reservations where they were far from the land they stewarded, far from their resources, far from their literal lifelines, is a form of environmental racism. And we see the impacts today when we look at the health disparities that exist in Native communities. Another example of environmental racism is also the occupation, limitation of water and clean water to the people of Palestine, right? That's also another form of environmental racism that we see. The dumping of toxic substances by corporations at the border, knowing damn well that we have migrants migrating every single day through the borders that we know cause birth defects to people crossing the border, is a form of environmental racism. The siting of facilities, specifically jails and prisons next to toxic sites or on toxic sites, which there are many of them across the country, is also a form of environmental racism that I think is really important to uplift. And all of what these things have in common and what we're going to talk about today when we're talking about Amazon is these three things. One, environmental racism is intentional. Two, it's violent, and it uses violence for the purpose of, three, maintaining the power structure of this country, which upholds capitalism for making a profit, right? So it exists to maintain and continue making profits for corporations and the government. The picture on the right is one of the first examples of protests around environmental racism. It was the first time people were arrested for putting their bodies on the line when they were fighting against a toxic landfill being put in their community. It was the first time the government went in and arrested over 100 people for basically standing in the way of trucks coming in to bring in toxic landfill in Warren County, North Carolina. So that's a little bit of history, and something that I also want to outline that I think is going to come up as a theme throughout the conversation today is that corporations do not do this alone. Corporations do this with the complacency and many times the permission of the government. So it is not just them going rogue, being allowed to do what they want to do. The government many times is very well aware and many times permits this legally for it to happen. So how does this relate to Amazon? So over the past couple of years, I think there has been a lot more research in the way that Amazon grows, particularly their practices and the way that they've been able to grow over the last 2 decades to become this powerful figure that we've been talking about today. Their business model really inherently perpetuates environmental racism. Amazon may not have started it, but they definitely fall as one of the actors that perpetuates it. And as we heard earlier, Amazon is growing every single day in our supply chain. Their web footprint grows. Sometimes we don't physically see it, but it's growing, but their physical footprint is also growing. 1 day, 2 day shipping does not happen magically. It did not happen out of nowhere with the infrastructure we had now. Amazon had to very strategically grow in communities to be able to make this happen. And so in order for us to see like 1 day, 2 day shipping, this very unrealistic way of consumption that we're almost getting used to now, is because of the way they've physically grown in our communities and the way that they've used the infrastructure. Because what we've seen is that in communities across the United States where Amazon has grown, their communities have transformed to fit into Amazon's model. So cities are no longer there for the people that live there or there to serve the people that live there, but instead the city reroutes everything, reworks everything to make sure that it is working to push out Amazon's pace, Amazon's model of consumption and selling. And a consumer really wouldn't see this happening. They mostly just see the vans that come in and drop off their packages. But if you live in a logistics community, which there are many throughout the United States, and we're seeing more and more of them grow, you'll very much get to see the impacts on the day-to-day level, and you'll start to feel them in your bodies and in your health. And so one study that just came out a couple of months ago from Consumer Reports actually studied all the location of warehousing in the United States and saw that disproportionately higher Amazon is going into neighborhoods of color so that they can grow their impact. Why do they do it? Most likely because they know that if they were to do this in a white community, it would very much be pushed out faster and would not be accepted in the community, right? We know that they target high migrant communities, especially where there is a different language preference. And we also see them going into historically Black communities where we know there are histories of disenfranchisement and political power. And so what does this all mean, right? What do a bunch of warehouses really mean? And it really means a bunch of diesel trucks. And if you have, maybe we might see diesel trucks here and there on our commutes and in freeways, but to have anywhere from like 1,000 trucks driving an hour across the street, it really does change the makeup of your community. And so what I want to do now is show you a video that different communities across the United States put together to talk about what does it mean when you have a bunch of Amazons growing in your community. Woo.
Their trucks are always passing by, and since we're a residential area, it affects us most of the time. The kids are outside and they end up breathing in most of the diesel fumes that they release.
You know, everybody just has asthma. In college, I later learned like people talk about that as a illness because it is a respiratory illness and it's not just something that we all have.
Environmental racism is when the effects of pollution are disproportionately felt by people of color. It's a practice that Amazon does not yet acknowledge, measure, or have steps to correct.
Amazon is perpetuating environmental racism because they choose to build distribution centers and parking lots in our neighborhoods. We counted between 10 and 20 trucks every 10 minutes. That is a lot of truck movement in residential areas that also has one of the 2 local high schools across the street.
And the other day, the main pollutant in the air was ozone. Today it is PM 2.5, which is basically particulate matter from vehicles and more specifically, diesel trucks.
These facilities in low-income communities of color perpetuate environmental racism. We know that this is connected to poor health outcomes such as asthma, lung disease, and others.
This facility has already been a burden to the community, and it will continue to bring diesel pollution to an area that already deals with a disproportionate burden of air pollution.
Amazon contribuye al racismo ambiental porque sus guarejados están en nuestras áreas hispanas. Eso representa racismo.
Amazon needs to be involved in environmental justice instead.
I really want to make sure that we're not just out here sharing the difficulties and sharing how heavy this feels to live with it, but to know that these stories are going to be used to propel action, because that's what our communities deserve. What we really want is zero emissions. You know, we don't want natural gas trucks. We don't want net zero emissions. We want zero emissions.
I shared that so that folks could hear just firsthand what folks are going through or fighting when they talk about the growth of Amazon in their communities. And this is just one angle of it. So yeah, I showed that in particular, and you heard folks talk a little bit about the asthma, the respiratory illnesses, the cancers that exist. And we don't have enough health studies really to show us how much the impact really is, because the growth of the industry is happening so fast that it's almost difficult to keep track of. But we definitely do know that in some of our communities here, In the Inland Empire, where we've gotten to focus more, we do know there are higher levels of emergency room visits. There are higher numbers of asthma emergencies that are happening specifically in neighborhoods where you have warehouses nearby. And just to go in a little bit about my community, and then I want to talk a little bit more about other communities that are also being impacted. Our community is about 50 miles away from the ports of LA and Long Beach, the largest port in the United States. 40% of the nation's things are going through these ports, and then into our communities inland, and then out into the rest of the country. Is that sustainable? Not at all. Should we put it all on the backs of some people? Not at all, but that's the way that the goods movement is done in this country right now. Our areas like suburban, semi-rural, think kind of inland with lots of freeways. It's the largest inland port right after Joliet in the Midwest. And all of this area, we also have the largest concentration of Amazon warehouses here in the Inland Empire. And not only are they taking up vacant land as close as across the street or right behind someone's home, but they're also taking up they're now displacing entire neighborhoods. If Amazon comes in and sees that this neighborhood is strategic for them because it's near a freeway, near a rail yard, it's close to the ports enough, there have been entire swaths of redevelopments happening where people lose their homes, right? Renters are losing the place that they're living in because the city has now come in and allowed for some type of rezonement of the land. These warehouses are not tiny, talking about 1 million square feet, 2 million square feet, 3 million square feet at a time, causing thousands and thousands of trucks to come by into the community. And you would think this is beneficial. You would think that somebody living right there in front of the warehouse could be like, oh, I just ordered a package. I'm going to go across the street and pick it up. That's not how it works. Like, we don't get our packages any faster than anyone else does. If anything, our area is used to supply people that shop the most. I think this graph is really important. It shows the comparison of the high levels of air pollution in red with also the high levels of like poverty on the bottom. So you'll see the darkest purple is places with the most poverty, and then you'll see up above the levels with the most pollution. So this dynamic of both, like, I'm not earning enough with the jobs that are coming in, and I'm also being polluted the most. So like, what do I win, and who is this for? And so there was a study done in 2018, which is the graph on the map, that shows all of the pink areas are where the warehouses are located in. If you'll see, they're all almost inland, right? Inland to the cities of LA and to Long Beach, right? And you'll see the darkest reds are the people that shop the most from Amazon, while the yellows are the people that shop the least from Amazon. So you'll see in the parts, especially by the coastal region, in the red, you almost have no warehouses there, but they are the people that are shopping the most off of Amazon per zip code. I think it's 3 million or more sales or something per year in those regions. And you'll see how it kind of all throughout the region, you'll see how our areas are being used for the benefits of others. Extraction is not only happening from the infrastructure, from the taxes, but also from the labor that's being used to supply wealthier and wider communities on the coastal region. And this is the same kind of model that you'll also see in other parts of the country. One of the big fights that we got into was when Amazon decided that they wanted to create their Western Air Hub out of the airport here in San Bernardino. To make one-day shipping possible, or next day, they said, we need this air hub. We need air hubs because there's too much traffic on the streets. We need to fly things faster. We need to put them through airways. And so that's how we've seen the growth of freight air hubs throughout the country. Amazon came in, as they usually do. This might be like a similar story to many of you guys here. They came in super under wraps. They did not want to own the facility, but they had their developer come in and negotiate everything. The only notice they told to the residents of San Bernardino was in a newspaper. No offense, right? How many people are reading newspapers? I mean, maybe online, yes, right? But like a physical newspaper is where they put their only notice. And they expected everyone to be able to find out about these hearings, to be able to talk about the projects, et cetera, right? So In California, we have this law called CEQA, where if a project comes in, they have to release their environmental impact so that the decision makers have a better idea of what they're actually saying yes or no to. Amazon came in and totally undercounted the number of trucks that were going to come into the community. So on top of that, they had like a faulty environmental analysis that they gave the community. Our community said, you know what, Amazon, you're going to come into our community again because you already have about 5 other warehouses in the city. We want to negotiate with you. We want a community benefits agreement. We want you to negotiate with the residents. The residents have very clear demands of what they want. They want environmental mitigation. They want electric trucks in their communities. They want window panes, air filtration. They want specific hours of the day, all things to hopefully make Amazon a better neighbor in the community, right? Those were the environmental demands, but there were also demands from labor who were like, stop using temp agencies to hire us. Stop only allowing us to work a certain number of days a week. Like, we want full-time real employment if we're going to work here. And this is in the context that Amazon has a 100% turnover rate in their warehouses here in the Inland Empire. 100% turnover rate. That means people do not last there more than 6 months, a year, 2 years, right? After that, it's not, they leave and they just turn over, they turn out thousands and thousands of people. And I believe Amazon employs 50,000 workers in the region, which is a lot of people that they're churning in and out of their warehouses. And so we took Amazon to court because our city was like, you know what, we're not going to really help you guys get a benefits agreement. We think they're doing the bare minimum. We think they're doing the most by even coming and offering their great jobs to us. We're just going to allow this faulty environmental review to go through. And that's what happened. And so community members did come together. They created this big campaign to like bring light to the issue, and it ended up going to court, right? We wanted an appeal on the environmental review. Even the California Attorney General entered into the lawsuit because it was so clear that this was a sign of environmental racism, because they were coming into some of the one of the most polluted zip codes, most impoverished zip codes of San Bernardino to build out this air hub. Sadly, we did lose. The panel did not rule in our favor, but we did have a great dissenting opinion from one of the judges, which basically said this would never happen in the communities of Jeff Bezos, of the owner of this company. This would never go through, that the residents of San Bernardino are not disposable, their lives matter, and all of this reeks of environmental racism. We are going to be going for an appeal of this decision. And so hopefully any day now that will go up in front of judges again, but community members are not stopping. We know that this is wrong. We know that we want to see some type of justice. Sadly, the Air Hub is currently flying every single day now. They have 24-hour round-the-clock flights up until some type of decision is made. And I just want to say it's not just the Inland Empire, right? And it's not just warehousing that's the issue, and trucks and diesel pollution and land use, right? In the communities of Joliet out in the Chicagoland area, you're also seeing how warehouses specifically go in areas where there is a lot of economic challenge, as they say. But not just that, in the instance of Joliet, you also have Amazon being one of the largest users of water. And we heard that earlier today, how data centers are also such huge users of water. So what the communities in Joliet are doing was they did public records requests to find out who are the biggest users of water, and Amazon came up in the front. And so this is also in the context that Chicago is running out of water. They might not have water in the next couple decades. So what are they going to do, right? As you have an industry that's taking up all the water of community members. The residents in Joliet are fighting back. Their workers are involved in asking for possibly an Amazon water tax in the future, so that Amazon can be taxed for the water that they're using in their communities. And I think that's a really important strategy. And something that I'm learning through their work is that how do we tax this company for the real toll that it takes on our companies? Because they get so many tax subsidies, but we don't hear about them being taxed enough. That is in Joliet. You also have what's happening in Newark, New Jersey. Also the same type of idea. They're trying to get into the port airport. They're trying to grow in there in secrecy, all behind closed doors, all with this idea that people need the jobs there. And you have also another community campaign coming out of that where it's not just talking about clean air. It's not just talking about them cleaning up their emissions, but it's also what kind of jobs are you providing us, right? what kind of work are you doing? If you're going to continue union busting, do we really want that in our community, right? Not separating the two, because you can see many times how they try to pit labor and environment against each other. And I think what's really important about the Amazon movement is that that's not happening. You have workers and community members working together, fighting for the same thing, because at the end of the day, workers are also community members, right? And vice versa. And the last one I want to talk about is more of the Virginia one with the tech centers, right? So we heard earlier around how much energy data centers are using right now. And what happens when the energy that you rely on in your community comes from coal or other really dirty energy? That impact is tenfold, right? And at the same time, you have the irony that Amazon uses its web services that they're using off of fossil fuels to help roboticize and automize oil extraction technologies. So Amazon sells its web services to BP, Shell, so that they can automate oil and gas extraction. So the same thing we're trying to fight against is the thing that they are helping increase. So that's happening out in Virginia, and I'm glad I'm in this space because I'm hoping to learn more about what you guys are facing when it comes to the environmental impacts of Amazon and you're part of the community. And this report I can kind of send out later too, as I hope it helps think about some of those impacts as well. Let's see here. So going back to this idea of what we talked about earlier, environmental racism is 1, intentional, 2, it's used to inflict violence, and 3, it's the purpose of maintaining the status quo of our power structure, which right now in this country is to uphold capitalism, which is making profit by any means necessary. In all of these examples, you can see how Amazon is intentional about where it locates its facilities, where it's putting its polluting facilities. We know it inflicts violence of the everyday, a slow violence of the supply chain that people have real impacts of every day. And 3, it is using to maintain their power and grow their power. And this impact makes it so much more dangerous because Amazon is part of the very few corporations that are causing the destruction of the planet, right? Yes, I am all for individuals facing our individual actions and the impacts that we have on the climate. And we should analyze how our consumption habits have been curated by companies like this so that we have a big footprint. But that footprint of individual footprints doesn't come close to the footprints that some of these corporations are having. And Amazon starts getting into these buckets of corporations that are helping fuel the fire that is burning the planet, also that they can make some money. And so kind of going back to this, well, I mean, I don't know how much I have to reiterate, but the planet is burning, right? Day to day, we see the impacts of trucks, but sometimes we don't think about the larger context of burning fossil fuels as it has, right? Polar vortexes, extreme weather conditions, and then the global impacts, right? Of animal extinction, climate refugees, people losing their homes, et cetera, all happening because of the fossil fuels we're burning and the companies that are controlling that, right? And so going back to this idea of monopoly that we talked about earlier, so what happens when an entity is so strong that it gets to control the terms of the interaction? So Amazon is so powerful at this point that they get to control the terms of how they pollute. And they get to control the terms of their cleanup. And so organizers have worked hard to get Amazon to face its environmental impacts, right? But Amazon is, Amazon, and they have a great PR team, and they spend a lot of money to make sure that they look like they're not doing anything to the environment. Or if they do acknowledge they're doing something to the environment, they definitely promote how they're cleaning it up. And so, and yes, the climate pledge that they came out with a couple years ago, which kind of outlays how they're going to go green, how they're going to reduce emissions, how they're going to get to the Paris Agreement 10 years before, is about as performative as the stadium that they built called the Climate Pledge in Seattle. Like, yes, this is a real thing. This is what their climate pledge means, the stadium that they built. And what's worrying is that this climate pledge that they're calling for is them also getting more companies involved. So they are trying to get as many companies involved in reducing their emissions to sign on to Amazon's climate pledge. Let's reduce emissions together. Let's save the planet together. But when you start looking at this climate pledge, you see how it's so far off of what is really going on in our world and what their impact really is. Their climate pledge says nothing about their logistics chain. It says nothing about the heavy duty trucks or their use of diesel in communities of color. It only says things about the delivery van. It only says things about what the consumers are going to see. They're going to go zero emissions on the delivery vans, but they don't say anything about the trucks. They said nothing about the growing use of their warehousing, the displacement of people. They didn't say anything about how AWS helps extract oil and gas. They didn't say they're stopping that. And they also want to do this thing called net zero, which is a wonky environmental term for basically saying that we're going to go to zero by offsetting what we do. So I'm going to keep using these data centers that use energy and water, but I'm going to put solar panels somewhere in the Midwest, and that's going to basically like equalize what I'm doing. This idea of net zero is something that the environmental movement, you have policymakers that are all for net zero, and then you have folks that are at the front lines that are like, what do you mean? So you're saying I still have to breathe in this intoxicated air or see the loss of my resources as long as something else is being done somewhere else, right? That's what we're seeing this climate pledge is all centered around. So really a huge problem when we think about how they are setting the terms on how they clean up their impact, on how they clean up their pollution. So two things, right? One is that they shouldn't be allowed to set their standards of how they clean up. And then two, we have a government that is being complacent about it, not coming in and saying, actually, this is not enough, Amazon. Actually, we think we should regulate you. We're not seeing enough of that movement. And in an era where we have just years to reduce our carbon footprint, we know that we don't have enough time, right? We don't have enough time to be waiting for companies who literally make money off of these things to tell themselves that they're going to make less money or they're going to have less growth for the sake of the planet. So what I do know is that together, we have to work together, right? What do we do about all of this? How do we take back? How do we shape? How do we shape the way that we move our goods, that we get all of our basic needs? I heard earlier, and I hear a lot on the ground too, around how Amazon is beneficial to our folks in our disabled communities, to our parents, to our families, right? Growing families, to low-income communities, right? But how do we take it back so that it's useful for all of us and just for all of us? And right now, if Amazon controls our supply chain and continues to grow in controlling our supply chain, we're not going to be able to do that. We will not be able to get this just system. So how do we slow the growth? How do we break up? How do we get more accountability from our government officials? Because right now, the unrealistic standard that Amazon has created is both taking us towards climate catastrophe and also right now hurting people along the way. So some tools that we've used to kind of fight off Amazon and bring more awareness to our communities about the environmental racism is tools like the EPA's EJ screen. So I can definitely drop these in the chat once I get off of my presentation, but the EJ screen, super important to build awareness about where is pollution right now? Where is it coming from? What are the correlations between Amazon? If you're in California, the Cal Enviro screen is a really great tool. A new tool from the government is this SEJST, the SESH, and they also look into mapping tools so that you can map out what the impact of pollution is in your community. We've also done strategies like community participatory research, right? Partnering up both with academia to do truck counts and to also monitor the air quality in our region so that community members themselves can go out in the community and test for themselves the air, test for themselves the water, test how many trucks are going in and out of the communities. We've used tools such as public records requests to start understanding exactly how they're getting all of these permits to grow in the way they are. There are tools such as CEQA and NEPA. NEPA is a national tool for transparency where projects have to disclose what kind of environmental impact they're going to have. Those tools are really important. We've been able to go to shareholder meetings to build public awareness. And then the last one, which I think is really important, which I think we're doing today, is a lot of solidarity and power building with both workers, tech and warehouse workers, and community members. This picture on the right is an action that we did in the Inland Empire, where I think even some people from Virginia are here, right? It was a big mobilization that we had to show solidarity through Athena across different communities. And I think that's really important. Some of the tools that I'm learning, or some of the strategies I'm learning in California, I'm picking up from folks in Seattle and Newark and Joliet, and more of this cross sharing of information strategy, I think is really important. And I guess to leave us off with a, I guess, some success story, because we don't have a lot of successes. Amazon continues to grow in our communities. But one thing that we have been able to see is that when you make Amazon raise their environmental impacts or their labor standards, they leave. They'd rather not pick up the project. They'd rather not develop it if they are being forced to have high environmental and high labor standards. I wasn't able to find the article that talked about the labor one, but in California and San Diego, basically the county decided to put a working family ordinance with prevailing wage, requiring certain days off, requiring enough work so that they're not considered temporary employees. Amazon was like, you know what? We're not going to do this project anymore. They would rather continue their model in another place than they would there with those types of restrictions. And just a couple of weeks ago, we were able to get Amazon's developer in a city out here to basically raise the environmental demand. So the city was like, let them in, it's okay, like no requirements. We came in, we did sue on the project, and we basically negotiated with the developer and said, you need to like raise the standards. We want a certain percentage of investment into the infrastructure, into electric infrastructure. We want to see benefits into the nearby community. We want to see electric trucks, etc. Amazon pulled out of the project. Amazon was like, I'm not gonna do this if these are the requirements I'm gonna have. And so this has been something slow that we've been able to learn about how Amazon, when put to the test of really being this green corporation that they're trying to be, never follows through. Although they may be really good at greenwashing, I hope today showed a little bit of the layers of how they're not very green. And yeah, here's my information at the end, and hopefully we can have any type of discussion on questions or anything like that I've shared. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That was really, really, really powerful. I learned so much. I'm definitely still taking it in and processing it. And it's really, really helpful to also know what's going on in other parts of, this country, because all of these, we're all interconnected, and these issues are all interconnected.